Question number 2, Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Does he agree with the Productivity Commission regarding consumer prices that, quotes, when judged against average expenditure, the price level in New Zealand appears relatively high?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the report the member is citing, including that particular quote, is based on 2005 data. And in fact, I quote from the same report that says the most recent detailed data available on specific prices are for 2005, which was primarily used in the analysis. I'm very happy to discuss the poor quality of economic management we were experiencing as a country at that time. I think we can all agree that the cost of living rose very significantly in the 2000s. And that's not surprising. That was when we had a government that put the export sector into recession during a global boom, was on its way to lifting spending by 50% in 5 years, sending interest rates to nearly 11% and the current account deficit to around 8%, and a government that left consumer price inflation at more than 5% in 2008. So I agree that was pretty shameful, and I have to thank the member for his question.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Given that his answer said that it was about 2005, has the Minister not read the report, or does he not understand the difference between the rate of price growth and the level of prices, and that in fact the report shows that the relative level of consumer goods has got worse from 17th worst in the world to, in 2011, not 2005, 2011, now 11th worst in the world?
There you go.
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, that is exactly the point. If you read the report, which I have, it shows that through the 2000s, prices went up dramatically. We know that because inflation was going up faster than wages throughout that period. And since that time it's been improving, with the CPI now significantly lower than wage increases, including in the last 12 months and in the last quarter, where the reality is if you weren't a smoker, the cost of living went up by absolutely nil.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Is one of the reasons that New Zealand price levels have got worse relative to other countries because the standard supermarket price for 2 litres of milk in Australia is now around $2, yet it's $3.80 in New Zealand?
Honourable Stephen
Mr. Speaker,
Joyce.
on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I have free political advice to the member. I just wouldn't run this line of argument because the record about cost inflation in New Zealand was caused and experienced by the previous government, and actually prices relative to wages is improving under this government. Now, he can go on about that all day if he likes, but under this government, prices are going up slower than inflation. Under the previous government, prices were going up faster than people's wages.
Supplementary question, Andrew Williams.
The Minister, why is the government doing nothing about rising power prices, leaving many Kiwis, particularly the seniors, to struggle through a cold winter?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, well, the member's wrong. The government has done a lot about the prices of electricity, including promoting a much more competitive electricity market, and electricity price rises are much lower, and that is reflected in the overall cost of living increase, which for the last year was 1.5%. The year to March for all Kiwi consumers, 1.5%. The average wages over that period went up 3.2%. Now, if we continue on the path we're going and see that for some more years, then New Zealanders will experience a significant increase in their wages relative to prices. And in relation to people on superannuation, their incomes are linked to the average wage.
Up here to understand. Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Well, in respect of electricity then, why is it that when 60% of our electricity is hydropower made from public rivers, which is the cheapest electricity to produce in the world, cheaper than nuclear, why is it that New Zealanders pay through the nose for it?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister for Finance, again, I don't know why the member goes down this line, because his record on power prices was abysmal and went up far faster than they ever have in the more competitive market that this government has created. And New Zealanders know that, which is why they are obviously endorsing the economic direction of this government versus the proposals of the Labor, Green.com, Internet Mainer, opposition prospect.
Supplementary question, Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary question to the Minister of Finance. How does the cost of living under this government compare to previous governments, and what is the outlook for wage growth and inflation?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, in the 9 years to December 2008, the average annual cost of living increase, the average, was 3.1%. That compares to an average cost of living increase of 2.1% since the government came into office, and that included for the increase in GST, which was compensated with income tax reductions. In the year to March, annual inflation was 1.5%, and it was 0 in the March quarter for anyone who isn't a smoker. As I said, inflation in 2008 peaked at more than 5%. Looking ahead, budget forecasts show the average wage will rise to around $62,300 by 2018, which is an increase of just under 14% and well ahead of expected inflation of 9.8% over the same period. Well, not if Labor got it.
Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, what plan does the government have to make the family supermarket bill each week less excessive, given the increasingly high cost of food?
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I think the member needs to go and have a look at the actual cost inflation in New Zealand at the moment. Now, nobody's arguing that it isn't, the costs aren't there for households, but in terms of the increase in costs, it has literally gone up 1.5% in the last year, and only nil if you're not a smoker. If you're a smoker, then that's gone up a bit. But if you're not a smoker, nil, including food, because inflation includes food. That's the way we measure it. It's gone up absolutely nil in the last quarter.
Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Why does he think it's fair that a loaf of Vogel's bread, a New Zealand brand, costs around the equivalent of $3 a loaf in the UK, yet the same loaf here costs around $4.99 or $5?
Order.
Mr Speaker,
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the reality is New Zealand right now has a far healthier economy with better job growth and better job prospects than the UK, and that's one reason for the UK really struggling at this point in time. But our cost of living increases are actually lower than the UK's right now, and that's the reality of it. And for New Zealanders, wages are going up faster than inflation. If the member wants to look at the reason why some prices are higher overall, he needs to look no further than the 9 years of their government when the inflation of prices was out of control, particularly in 2008.
Order. Supplementary question, Honourable David Parker.
Is the Minister really so out of touch that he doesn't realise the report shows that prices in New Zealand relative to income have got worse relative to the rest of the world, going from, as I said earlier, I'm sorry, Mr Speaker, from 17th worst in the world now to 11th worst in the world because New Zealanders are paying too much for the basics?
That's right. Mr.
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
The member needs to be reminded, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, that this report relates to 2005 data. And in fact, it says, in terms of comparisons, the most recent detailed data available on specific prices are for 2005, which were primarily used in this analysis. We know who the government was in 2005. We know they did a particularly poor job of managing the New Zealand economy, so I'm really not sure why he's bringing this up today.
Because you look bad.
Supplementary question, Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary question to the Minister of Finance. What policies has he seen that would increase the cost of living for hard-working New Zealand households?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, a very fair question, because I think one of the many difficulties for the opposition is understanding cause and effect. And there's a number of policies that would pile costs on households and business. For example, a much larger and tougher emissions trading scheme would add around $500 a year to household power and fuel costs. A state-run monopoly electricity system would push up electricity prices and lead to blackouts. An expensive capital gains tax on every New Zealand business and farm, but only a quarter of housing, would also push up prices. Putting everybody in KiwiSaver and then declaring you're going to cut their pay by 6% on a whim, that would make it more difficult for people to afford to live. Watering down the Reserve Bank Act to go soft on inflation, that would push up the cost of living. And a big spending, big borrowing government to run everything from insurance to housing, that too would put up the cost of living, Mr Speaker.
Order. Point of order.
I think he's left it so late to get to the punchline that the Speaker won't let him do so, sir.
That is not a point of order. Question number 3, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr